Hey everyone, this is Thyworm with a new build for Last Epoch, the Leech. This is a Beastmaster build that bleeds your enemies dry while providing you with a healthy bunch of Leech. Thanks for watching another extensive build guide in which I'll go over every aspect of this build quite literally. If you're enjoying Last Epoch content, consider subscribing. Let's start with the build philosophy. I never really created a proper bleed build because poison was always the obvious way to go. It may still be the way to go, but bleed received a buff, so I wanted to see what I could achieve with this. If you want to follow me along on those journeys, come hang out on twitch.tv/Thyworm. I stream quite regularly and I'm always trying out new builds. The results for this particular build are pretty decent actually. I took a Beastmaster all the way to the Emperor of Corpses and killed him at around level 78. The journey was pretty smooth overall, with a nice gradual increase in power while being pretty tanky at the same time. It's nothing crazy in terms of damage, but I found it an enjoyable playstyle, and contrary to most minion builds, you play an active role. I leveled in solo self-found mode, so you can be sure there's no overpowered gear involved either, although I did find a few very useful uniques. I never really struggled while leveling, only the final timeline was a bit rough, which is to be expected when you take on level 100 content as a level 75 character, and I died like 3 times in the entire playthrough, in 20 hours or so. That's really not bad. As with most minion builds, this is a very decent boss killer, as minions apply a lot of bleed stacks while you're dodging stuff. It results in a high DPS uptime, and with our unique axe we increase the speed of applied bleeds whenever we hit an enemy. Not an awful lot of dodging skill shots is required either with the amount of leech we have. I looked for a way to reduce the defense stacks on gear, because gearing to get resistance capped for 7 damage types is no fun. I found in Eterra's Blessing a node that covers all elemental and poison resistances, but there's a catch, a pretty big one. The effect lasts only 4 seconds. So, if you either forget to cast it or it runs out, you have 0% fire, cold, lightning and poison resistance, and things can go wrong. It's a bit of a high risk, high reward playstyle, which I'll cover extensively later in the guide. We have a lot of leech though to stay alive, but bosses can one-shot you with elemental abilities, particularly around the higher monoliths. I still feel it's worth it because of all the affixes I'm saving, which I put in damage, leech, health and minion survival, but it's definitely a little risky from time to time. I would therefore say that the build is easy to play but does require a bit of game knowledge to truly master. Whenever you get big elemental or poison damage incoming, be sure to cast Eterra's Blessing on yourself. When you don't want to deal with this, you can take another skill, maybe another pet, and stack the resistances on your gear. That does take a hefty toll on affixes however, and I quite like the freedom I created on the gear, basically disregarding 4 damage types completely. Feels good. So, what do you need in terms of stats? Here's the wish list. In the defense department, you want to get res capped for necrotic, void and physical damage. You need to be crit avoidance capped as well, and leech and health or vitality are important to keep your big health bar topped off. In the offense department, we're looking for attack speed, damage over time and physical damage scaling, as bleed is physical damage over time effect. Obviously, you're looking for chance to bleed and bleed duration and bleed effectiveness as well. That last stat increases the base damage of bleeds, which is super good. Finally, we have a bunch of wolves, which you want to give some minion health, as much minion dodge rating as you can find, and bleed affixes once again. Let's look at the skill specialization and the skills we're using. A lot of the skills we use in this build are skills you're getting very early on. You can therefore decide what you like to start with, but I'll cover the skills in the proposed order that I would take them, starting with the wolves. In the wolf tree there are 2 interesting nodes. Safety in numbers lets you summon wolves to your companion limit, which means 2 wolves at the start up to 6 wolves near endgame. This is a very useful node, so I would rush that node from the start. The other cool node is pack hunters, which lets you have another wolf and it increases the companion limit too. For summon wolf, we first go to the right, taking 1 out of 4 canine agility just to get to serrated claw, a very good node. Take 3 points at first, go to crippling wounds for the bleed duration, and then take safety in numbers. Then you should fill up all the bleed nodes over here. Patient hunters increases the bleed effect and dots of the wolves, which is very powerful. After spending 12 points in the bleed node over here, you move left. Take 2 out of 5 Lupine Endurance to get to 2 out of 4 Wolfen Recovery to get to 1 out of 3 Earthborn to get to Pack Hunters. It is the last node you'll take, but once you're there, the reward is very good. I would take Swipe as the second skill. Especially at the start of the game, you're doing significant damage compared to your wolves. As the game progresses, this becomes less and less balanced, and in endgame the wolves do way more damage than you. You start with the bleed nodes, so take 5 out of 5 blood beast, giving you 100% bleed chance. Take 4 out of 4 rending to shred physical resistances. This is useful because bleed is a physical damage over time effect, and lowering the physical resistances of enemies increases bleed damage. Then take 4 out of 4 aspect of the Panther, which gives you up to 8 stacks that provide 10% increased global damage. That is pretty significant, 80% increased global damage. Take Feline Hunter because attack speed is very good for us. More attack speed means more bleed stacks and more physical shredding. We want to turn Swipe into a culling strike as well, so take 2 out of 8 Ways of the Hunt, take 2 out of 4 Wangarian Reach, which is kind of useful actually, a bit of swipe reach, and then 2 out of 2 culling, which means our swipe attacks instantly kill anything below 14% health. For bosses, this is an amazing node, especially in endgame. Our third skill is Eterra's Blessing at level 19. By now, the defense it provides will come in handy, and it's the main reason we're getting this skill. Take 5 out of 5 Safeguard, capping our elemental and poison resistances for 4 seconds. Take 5 out of 5 Conservation, because there are instances where you are casting this skill a lot and it should be the cheapest it can be. Then we take some additional utility. Take 4 out of 5 Improved Healing to get to Efflorescence, making the skill do a heal over time, which works well with Leech. Regrowth heals us again after the healing over time expires. We take Purge, which is quite a useful skill because it removes ailments like Mark for Death, Slow and Chill. Finally, take 3 out of 3 Ancestral Renewal, which summons a bunch of healing totems. They're not too bad actually, as they take some aggro and they heal you and your wolves. Our fourth skill is Summon Frenzy Totem, which increases our damage quite a bit. The Frenzy effect overlaps with the Wolf Howl effect, but that's not really overkill, as Frenzy is extremely powerful for bleed stacking, because it increases your melee attack speed by 20% by default. You always want to have this buff available, just like the Wolf Howl ability. We're putting this on auto cast. Start with 5 out of 5 Grounded, increasing flat damage, which is kind of nice, but mostly reducing mana cost. We are autocasting this after all. Take Dig In, creating a tether, and if you're in range, you do 100% increased damage. That is a big buff. Take 4 out of 4 Totemic Reach, increasing the tether range. Take 4 out of 4 Rapidity, increasing the frenzy effect by 40%, making the totem do 28% increased attack speed. Take 3 out of 5 Reinforced Totem, so this thing survives a bit longer and lasts a bit longer, and take 3 out of 5 Reach, increasing the totem reach effect. Finally, we're using a movement skill to get out of hairy situations, to dive into battle, and to manage our pack of wolves as they are jumping with us. Take 7 out of 7 Warrior's Entrance, increasing your, but primarily your minions' damage by 105%. That is pretty massive. 3 out of 3 Rage increases attack speed by another 30%. Pack Leader makes your wolves jump with you, which is very useful. We got some points left without a real good purpose, so I just decided to summon more minions. Take 3 out of 6 Crushing Impact, then take 3 out of 5 Rise and 3 out of 5 Poisonous Thicket. You now have a 60% chance to summon 3 vines at departure and at arrival. Those are minions and benefit from our stats. They do apply bleeds and they do take aggro, but of course this isn't a reliable mechanic in any way. Every tiny bit helps though, especially when stacking damage over time effects. Time to look at the passives. I decided to more clearly indicate the powerful nodes in the skill tree and explain my decisions. Looking at the base tree, it is all defenses. The Beastmaster tree is a nice mix, however, of defense and offense. All of the nodes highlighted here are defensive nodes, which generally provide flat damage reductions and health. The nodes highlighted here are offensive nodes, providing bleed related stuff and attack speed mostly. There are plenty of stats I am not interested in. Those stats are crit and flat melee damage. We're a damage over time build. It doesn't matter how much the minions hit for, it only matters how many bleed stacks they apply, which is true for me as well. On the base primalist tree, we see a bunch of health nodes and some leech. This whole tree is pure defense really. Take 6 out of 6 Gift of the Wilderness for that health. Take 3 out of 6 Primal Medicine because you need to spend the points. And then go 4 out of 6 Ancient Call for more health. On the right side we take 1 point in Primal Strength just to get the 6 out of 6 Survival of the Pack. This is our first Leech node, and even though it's only melee attack Leech, which isn't the best, the sustain is very decent. Before we dive into Beastmaster, take a small trip to the Druid skill tree and pick up 6 out of 6 Blood Claws, which grants physical damage leeched as health and physical penetration. Bleed is physical damage, and Leech also works with damage over time effects, so 12% Leech here is massive. With the health we got from the base tree, you're already pretty tanky. Now we move to the Beastmaster tree, and your priority here is to get to Viper Fangs and Force of Nature as soon as possible. I leveled pretty tanky, so I took 4 points in Ursine Strength because of the damage mitigation. I took 1 point in Savagery just to get to Ambush, which grants Aspect of the Shark. Disregard the damage, it's about the attack speed. 10% is a lot at lower levels. Take 5 out of 5 Boar Heart, which gives Aspect of the Boar, a flat damage reduction of 15%, which is massive. Take 4 out of 8 Tusk Warrior for the bleed chance, and because we need to spend points, and because we need 4 points invested to progress that tree. Then take 5 out of 5 Porcine Constitution, increasing the flat damage reduction from Aspect of the Boar to 30%. And then take 8 out of 8 Deep Wounds, granting 120% bleed effectiveness. This increases the base damage that bleed does, because that's normally a static number. 120% is massive, and because Aspect of the Boar is usually active, this is an amazing node. You can take Rending Maw and Hunters of the Deep, which grant the Aspect of the Shark to your companions as well, increasing their attack speed. You should by now have enough points for Viper Fangs, a massive damage increase. This node works best with poison, but for bleed stacking it is also quite insane. It increases chance to poison on hit to 100%, it increases the damage over time by 100%, and it increases your and your companion's attack speed by 50% whenever you proc the Aspect of the Viper. This happens 30% of the time on hit, but because you attack so fast, this buff is basically always active. Totally bonkers this node, and sorely needed to apply those bleed stacks in quick succession. Don't forget to get Force of Nature when you can, because an additional wolf is an overall DPS increase of at least 15%. By now, your build is pretty solid, and it's about fine-tuning really. I completed Ursine Strength for more tankiness. The damage reduction is pretty good. Take 8 out of 8 Life in the Wilderness, which is just a lot of health. Take 8 out of 8 The Chase, making minions attack 32% faster. I do advise taking a few points in Primal Strength, so you don't only proc the Aspect of the Boar when you're being hit, but also when you hit enemies. 2 points worked for me. You might want to spend a few more points. Primal Aspect increases every aspect's duration, which is very useful. You might want a few points in that node depending on how many aspects are up and how easily you can maintain them. We're only level 79, and this character has the potential to level much higher than this, as level 100 content isn't much of an issue. I would invest in more tankiness personally, plus rounding out the aspect durations, as that is a very balanced way to increase your character's power level. The Druid tree has more vitality available as well as some tanky stats. It's worth your time and investment, I would say. Then, also very important, gear. With the way we built our character, you are specifically looking for physical, necrotic and void resistance. Eterra's Blessing covers the rest. Armor you will collect, as the gear has a decent amount of it, but you don't need to go out of your way to get a lot of armor otherwise. We have a shield, which is another defensive layer, and it really helps. For the Monolith you want to be crit capped as well, and that brings me nicely to the actual gear itself, and getting a bit of frailty on hit, reducing enemy damage by 18% at 3 stacks, never hurt anyone either. A really nice item with a very high drop rate from the abomination in the Monolith, the first boss, is the Woven Flesh. It does all the right things for this build: health, leech and 100% crit avoidance. You won't replace this piece for a long time. The Taste of Blood is also an exquisite unique. It is very common and drops all the time. Its damage isn't impressive, but around 80% chance to bleed on hit is pretty good. However, the power of this item lies in the Last Epoch, which makes all bleed stacks double in speed whenever we hit enemies. This means that bleed damage applies twice as fast. You do not apply more bleed stacks, by the way. It's just that the ones you do apply expire twice as fast and deal twice as much damage. Overall, this isn't really a DPS increase, but it does reduce the ramp up time a lot of damage over time builds have, and bleed damage from all stacks is basically applied instantly, making it a very good item. If you can't find this unique, get a fast weapon with stats from the wishlist like attack speed and bleed on hit. Like I said, the DPS is the same, the ramp up time will just be a little bit longer. Another great item is the Wing Guards with a massive attack speed modifier. The drawback of not being able to crit isn't a problem at all for us. If you can't find these, any gloves with attack speed will do. Your rings should be turquoise rings for the minion stats, and apart from that you can look at my gear and see it's really not that impressive. There's a TunkLabs URL of course for you guys, so you can check out the gear over there. You should aim for a nice mix of minion stats as well, some damage over time or physical damage, resistances, health, and that's really about it. There are no fancy primalist affixes here, and by farming endgame you can really scale this gear up a few notches, but it's already sufficient, which is what I wanted to prove. In terms of honorable mentions, or if you're leveling this as a twink and you have a bunch of gear in your stash, which should be completely OP by the way, the doublet of Ono's tool is a great starter item at level 5. Eterra's path I've used for a while and it's quite good, because the defense tax is low on gear. You can easily get away with wearing 3 or 4 uniques and still be res capped. Pebble's wand at early levels will make your wolves do massive on-hit damage. The fang and the claw are good as well, although not required with this build as we just take the points in the tree, we're there anyway. And of course, last but definitely not least, Artor's legacy for that 6th wolf and even more additional attack speed. In terms of idols, there are a lot of good ones. Minion chance to bleed, bleed duration, minion attack speed, some aspect idols, they're all very viable. I found a very cute chilling idol which chills nearby enemies whenever I spend more than 20 mana. Eterra's blessing costs 21 mana, so I took it. With my loot filter settings, you should have no issues gearing this character. All the gear you see I found myself and crafted myself. I ran this character from level 1 to the end of the Monolith while creating these filters for you guys, and I never felt weak in any part of the game. In terms of blessings, there are a few good ones. I got minion damage, health regen and a chance to bleed on hit. It's okay, but really nothing special. I have created 6 loot filters for the build when I was leveling this character myself. As you can imagine, that was quite a bit of work, so you know, if you enjoy this guide, give it a like, it really helps. These loot filters you can just import in the game folder, extract them over there and then select them from the loot filter menu. I created a video on how to do this exactly in case you don't know how this works. Head to the link in the description, which brings you to the forums of Last Epoch. There I will upload the loot filters. You can also join my Discord to get the loot filters, and of course we got a very nice community over there and you can ask all the questions you may have about the build. The loot filters should be pretty self-explanatory with the description and everything, so I think you'll be fine. On to leveling. This is one of those builds you can just level from level 1 all the way to level 100 and no changes are really required. I personally really enjoy that you don't need to gain 40 levels first before the build comes online. It is online right from the start, as you start out with 1 wolf, and as you and your pack of wolves grow stronger, you get more wolves, more bleed stacks, more tankiness and more damage output. A big power spike is the frenzy totem, which really boosted my DPS significantly, and reaching aspect of the viper is also a massive increase in DPS, especially when you have 10 points invested. Leveling really is a breeze and overall it's just super smooth. Let's talk some monolith modifiers. Generally, I don't mind giving enemies health, crit avoidance, crit chance, because we're immune anyway, or any of the healing modifiers. Those are all safe modifiers to take because we do decent damage, and damage over time builds generally take good care of larger health pools. You could give them dodge, although that's annoying. What you really want to watch out for is increasing their elemental damage. Unless you cast Eterra's blessing, we have 0 elemental resistances. That is really not that big of a problem against packs of normal monsters in the Monolith, but if you give them 100% increased elemental damage, you simply get one shot. So avoid that stuff at all costs. In any other case, we have resistances from our gear for other damage types, and our massive leech keeps us healthy. All you need to do is survive the one-shots and keep attacking the enemy. And that brings us to the playstyle of the build. Here's the build in action. You could say it's a bit of a high risk, high reward playstyle like I did at the start of the video. The risk is that you forget to cast Eterra's blessing and get one shot by an ice blast or an avalanche. Now this doesn't mean you should cast Eterra's blessing all the time. As a matter of fact, you hardly ever need to cast it, because you have enough leech to tank through enemy elemental attacks even at 0% resistances. It is really only for bosses that this becomes an issue. Formosus, Yulia, the frost dudes in the dragon level, the fire dragons and the elemental dragon trio. Those are instances where not casting Eterra's Blessing hurts quite a bit. Depending on your gear, it doesn't straight out kill you, but you are a lot more vulnerable. In many instances, however, poison and elemental damage is nowhere to be found, especially not in lethal quantities, and you figure out fast enough which enemies in monoliths are dangerous and require a cast every now and then. If the whole world consists of ice or the entire level is burning, well, there's a good chance there are some elemental enemies, I would say, so watch out. I personally find this playstyle very worth it. The reward is that you have a lot of freedom when it comes to your gear. You can wear like 5 uniques and still be res capped when it matters. You can take a bunch of other affixes on gear, in particular health and vitality, which offset a lot of the drawbacks of not having resistances on gear. It is fun, it's liberating, it's something I hope the devs give us more in other skills, because I feel the amount of required resistances and other defensive affixes is too much currently. I had a lot of fun creating this build, all the way from start to finish. It took a lot of time as well, but I hope it was worth it. Finally, I wanted to bring the Nexus to your attention. Nexus offers content creators their own store to sell games, and then the content creators get a little bit of the profit as well. I've partnered with these guys and curated a small selection of games for you, all games that I've covered on the channel. It is a great way to support me and the developers, so if you're thinking about getting Last Epoch, consider getting a Steam key over there, link below in the description. I hope you have fun with the build, guys, and that the guide was useful. Thanks for watching and making it to the end. See you soon, bye bye.